This exhibition gives you the opportunity to see one of the nation's really exceptional collections of German art. And, we always have fantastic works of German art on view at our museum. It's one thing that St. Louisans know and love about our museum. But this is a chance to see works that have not been on view for a long time and to see them in a new context.
After we were given the opportunity as a curatorial staff to come up with a collections-based exhibition, we started talking about what areas of the collection could be used, how the German art collection actually had so much depth that we could stage a show of post-war works.
And one of the things I feel like we were really surprised and excited about was we were able to really take this opportunity to show some things that we haven't had the ability to show. And it just built outwards towards including so many more interesting objects that give a lot of context to post-war German art, such as the modern German art starting in 1800, as well as decorative art, prints, drawings, photographs, building that sort of story of German art out on a longer scope.
So the first gallery is a large gallery, and it's entitled Nature and Nationhood. People maybe don't realize that, in 1800, in the early 19th century, there was no German nation. Instead, what there was a collection of different kingdoms and provinces, like Prussia or Bavaria or Saxony. And the 19th century sees the kind of development of ideas of nationhood in Germany. And that ultimately leads to 1871, when you see the establishment of a German nation. One of the things I was interested in was the way in which artists were traveling around the different provinces of Germany. So to take the example of Friedrich, he often paints around Saxony. He worked in Dresden. The painting that we have is called Sunburst in the Riesengebirge. It shows a mountain range on what is now the border of the Czech Republic and Poland. One of the interesting things about this exhibition is the sort of direct connections that it has to St. Louis. A lot of Germans immigrated to St. Louis, particularly in the mid-19th century. Berkelin was Swiss, but he worked much of his life in Munich. And this particular painting, Venus, she's kind of rising up out of the sea. Berkelin was fascinated by mythological subjects.
We have this fantastic collection of German Expressionism. It was the dominant style of modern art in Germany from around 1910 to about 1925. It really starts up sort of tragically in the years right leading up to World War I, and then it continues slightly after. But its heyday is that period of 1910 to 1914. So you have a generation of these young German artists who are inspired by Dürer. They're looking at Matisse, and they're looking at Gauguin, and they're looking at Van Gogh, and they're looking at Munch. And they're trying to create a new German version of that approach to modern art. It's impossible to talk about Germany as a nation or a culture without talking about war. So you have the outbreak of World War I, due in large part to Germany's kind of drive for nationalism. And in place of the empire, you have Germany's first democratic parliamentary republic, which is established in 1919. Suddenly, women can enter art academies from which they had previously been banned. There's also this really fantastic German propaganda poster from World War I. It really offers a window into the sort of psychology of this moment. It features John Bull, who is a personification of England, and he's wearing his uniform and he has his sort of horsewhip, and then beneath his legs is an English bulldog, and he's standing on a map of Europe, and he's turning his back on Germany. So the British are blockading all German imports into the country, which is contributing to an existing food shortage. It says, "England is your enemy," and it is this moment in 1917, 1918, Germany is losing. Germany is not going to win this war. So the last section of the material leading up to World War II It focuses on this interconnection of art and industry, specifically in the Weimar period. And this is occurring at a time when German industry is taking off. Its sort of sudden industrial growth has to do with technical education. And so in Germany, industry was not considered to be incompatible with art. For German artists working in 1915, 1925, the machine represented the apex of precision. It represented a new kind of beauty. There was also a sort of obsession with technological media being used to make art: photography, film. The equipment for which had been around for a long time, but there was a new interest in utilizing that equipment for artistic means. A good example of that is Rangar Patch's fantastic photograph of industrial valves.
The gallery Trauma and Memory was an attempt for us to really examine post-war artists who were considering the Nazi past. And for many reasons, the museum doesn't have a lot of Nazi-era artworks. A lot of institutions didn't collect that material. So these artists were children during the war or young adults in the immediate aftermath. So they were also dealing with realizing their parents' and their grandparents' implication with the war and kind of finding a way to think through something that they weren't directly implicated in, but they were historically forever implicated in this moment.
Capitalist Realism is a gallery that is really about artists working predominantly in the 1960s, but who were sort of young during the 1950s, which was this period in which West Germany particularly experienced a lot of changes because after the World War II, Germany was really in ruins, but due to the US support of Germany with the Marshall Plan and other economic factors, the economic situation changed actually much more rapidly. And this really changed people's lives. I mean, imagine people recovering, from their war and now being able to afford some of these luxuries. One interesting artist who is a really important figure in capitalist realism is Sigmar Polke. And he's an artist who has a sort of ironic and humorous stance towards all of these developments. And he really noticed the way that consumerism acted almost like a narcotic on people, allowing them to distract themselves from very uncomfortable topics. Why Can't I Stop Smoking is a great example of this attitude. It's a white background painting with a sort of roughly sketched outline of a man, a very sort of conventional looking mid-century man in a tie. And then scrawled at the top of the painting in English is the words, "Why can't I stop smoking?" Polka's combined this sort of image that you almost might take out of an advertisement and sort of made a very anti-aesthetic version of it. A really amazing and fun work that we have in the Capitalist Realism Gallery is Dieter Roth's Chocolate Gnome. It's a garden gnome, a sort of very kitschy garden gnome in a glass vase. And in the vase is a lot of chocolate that sort of fills up the vase up to the gnome's hat, which you can just see sort of peeking out of the top of the chocolate. It connects really well to these themes of capitalist realism. Chocolate, for example, as this sort of commodity that Germans were able to purchase in the post-war period.
The gallery Performative Impulses looks at performance art in Germany in the post-war era, which became incredibly important to many artists. There was a performative impulse of artists to work outside of traditional methods of painting and of sculpture, but actually to embrace art as a lived experience. And really the main figure for this entire section is the artist Joseph Beuys, who became, in so many ways, the godfather of German performance art. He was larger than life, incredibly charismatic, had shamanistic, ritualistic performances that really captured an entire generation. And in this gallery is one of his most iconic works, which is a felt suit, which was part of an edition of around 100 objects. And it was used in a Vietnam War protest performance. So what we have is an object that's left over from the performance as a way for us to think about what he was doing, think about what these performances meant, but still have something that's around for the future. The gallery Cold War Paintings is really interesting for this show in particular. we actually decided to look at painting in the Cold War era from about 1970 to 1989 and compare abstraction and figuration to show them in the same gallery together, to look at artists who were dealing with Germany's division. Immendorf's Four Muses is a painting that actually encapsulates every theme of this gallery. It is a painting that's intended to be read, so everything in the painting is of narrative and symbolic value. And the Four Muses are actually four post-war German artists, including Immendorf himself. And then he's also represented A.R. Pank, Georg Baselitz, and Markus Lüpertz, so he's created a kind of de facto artist studio within the picture plane. And what Immendorf's doing is he's commenting on the nature of German art at the time and his friends and how important they are. So it becomes as much autobiographical as it is a kind of arrogant statement about the state of the art world. Gerhard Richter is probably the most famous post-war German painter, and his multifaceted practice has become synonymous with post-war German art. One of the paintings in this gallery that really emphasizes this idea of Cold War abstraction is Gerhard Richter's Ulberg from 1986. And in this painting, it looks very much like a gestural abstraction in a traditional sense. But Richter's actually carefully constructed this painting and made it through a system of squeegeeing the paint and removing and adding different areas of paint, but it's planned out. It's ideological, it's carefully calculated. Abstract painting in this era was a way to extend that painterly idea into the realm of visual abstraction. And part of that is Richter came out of East Germany. He fled right before the Berlin Wall went up. And so for him, realism, abstraction, East-West Germany, these things all were a dichotomy to him that he was thinking through and dealing with in his art.
Blurring Boundaries, it looks at a period from right before the fall of the Berlin Wall in the 1980s up until the 2000s, and looking at developments that happened around the fall of the wall in the art world. It looks at developments of conceptualism and ways that artworks themselves changed, and it also looks at political and social changes in Germany. We ended up incorporating two amazing photographs in that gallery, one by Berta Gutschau, and one by Simona Nieweg. And the Gutschau is a really cool example of new kind of emerging photography techniques, because what Gutschau has done with the photograph is actually taken different photographs of people in all sorts of situations and superimposed them over a landscape photograph to create a sort of constructed landscape that almost looks back to these very historical depictions of landscape. And the Nieweg is also looking at landscape as a sort of holder of identity. It's an example of this kind of way of divvying up the land in Germany called Grabland, where German cities have a communal plot. And so in the photograph, you see just these cabbages, but in the background, you see an urban center. So it allows us to tell these stories of the way that urban life and the way really rural life as well changed in the post-war period.
I think one of those key moments that we both really had an aha moment with was, what do you do with Betty, the Mona Lisa of the post-war German art collection? And you know, Betty has been on its own wall in the permanent collection gallery. She's visited by people from all over the world. How do you put Betty in context of the late 80s, early 90s, of this incredible moment of Germany before the wall falls, but really at the precipice of everything changing?
I've felt like it's been really interesting to look at Betty in terms of conceptual practices in the post-wall period in Germany, and to look at the painting in terms of the history of photography, because Richter was very much thinking about photography in that painting.
With this exhibition, you have an opportunity to see those events and really live those events through the eyes and minds of the artists. 120 works by 64 different artists, starting with the fall of the Holy Roman Empire to the early 2000s, all in 6 galleries. So it is a grand arc of history that rarely gets told within an exhibition context.